Revenge office stories. You'll never be management material. My boss didn't just say it, he declared it. He didn't whisper it in a private feedback session. No, he announced it in the middle of our open plan office, in front of the entire department, during our weekly project review. Those 7 words shot across the conference table like little poison darts and just stuck there. The silence that followed was so loud. You know, that thick, uncomfortable quiet where everyone suddenly becomes fascinated by their own keyboard, the ceiling, anything but my face. I could feel my cheeks burning, this hot tide of shame. I was 34. I had a master's degree, 10 years of experience, and a string of successful projects under my belt. And in one sentence, my boss, Mark, had just made me feel like a little kid being scolded in class. He was holding a report I'd spent 60 hours on, a report that laid out how we could be 20% more efficient. He just waved it in the air. "This," he said, his voice just dripping with condescension, "is fine work for an analyst. But leadership? That takes vision, charisma, a certain presence. You're a doer, Sarah, a great one, but you're not a leader." Then he smiled. It was this tight, thin-lipped smile that didn't come anywhere near his cold, dead eyes. It was a smile that said, "I just put a ceiling on your career, and I'm pretty proud of myself." Then he just moved on to the next item on the agenda, as if he hadn't just publicly executed me. But those 7 words didn't just disappear. They were meant to break me, to put me in my place, so I'd never get ambitious enough to be a threat. Instead, they became the fuel for a 2-year plan to quietly and methodically take his job. The rest of that meeting was a total blur. I sat there, nodding and pretending to write things down, but the only thing I could hear was his voice echoing in my head. When it was finally over, I walked back to my desk, trying to keep my face perfectly neutral, but I could feel the pitying looks from my colleagues. Nobody said a word. I mean, what could they say? Mark was the director, the golden boy who could do no wrong in the eyes of the executives. I drove home in complete silence. No radio, just me, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles while that scene played over and over in my head. Each time, the humiliation felt just as sharp. Public humiliation is a special kind of awful, isn't it? It doesn't just sting your ego, it poisons your whole sense of self. It's the kind of thing that makes you question everything. And I spiraled, feeling worthless. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just a worker bee, meant to spend my life building someone else's vision. That night, I didn't sleep a wink. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying his words. He hadn't been angry. He delivered it like it was an obvious fact, and that's what made it so much worse. It wasn't just an insult. It was his final judgment on my entire career. All his little criticisms and belittling comments finally made sense. He was trying to chip away at my confidence. But then, around 3 a.m., something in me just shifted. The shame and the anger started to settle, and something cold and hard took their place. It was a single, crystal-clear thought. He does not get to define me. He'd made a huge mistake. He thought that by breaking my confidence, he'd broken my spirit. He saw a quiet worker. He didn't see the quiet observer, the patient strategist hiding underneath. I got out of bed, went to my desk, and opened a fresh notebook. Everything I'd ever read about toxic bosses screamed the same advice: document everything. A paper trail is the one thing they can't talk their way out of. So I started. On the first page, I wrote the date and the time. And then I wrote down his 7 words. "You'll never be management material." Beneath it, I wrote a vow to myself. Asterisk, I will not get angry. I will not get even. I will get ahead. I will take his job, not by fighting him, but by outperforming him. This won't be loud. It will be a quiet, methodical, and undeniable climb. Asterisk. This wasn't going to be a war fought in HR meetings. That never works against a guy like Mark, who's a master at managing up. No, this would be a silent campaign, a 2-year siege. I would become so good, so essential, that his incompetence would become a liability the company couldn't ignore. He had drawn the battle lines. I had just accepted the terms. My revenge didn't start with a big confrontation. It started with a quiet transformation. I called the first phase of my plan the sponge. My goal was to absorb everything: skills, knowledge, political connections, and most importantly, evidence. I stopped thinking of myself as a victim and started acting like an anthropologist studying a very dysfunctional tribe. First, documentation. That notebook became my Bible. On my personal laptop, I made a spreadsheet logging every single one of Mark's moves. Date, time, what happened, who saw it, and the impact. Every missed deadline. Every time he took credit for my work. Every nasty little comment in a meeting. It all went in the log. Asterisk October 12 asterisk Mark presented my Q3 analytics report to the VP as his own. When the VP asked a technical question, Mark passed it to me, saying I handled the groundwork. Witnesses: David Chen, Maria Flores. Asterisk November 3 asterisk on a client call. Mark promised a deliverable by Friday that he never even asked us about. It meant 40 hours of overtime for my team. I saved the meeting recording. Asterisk December 18 asterisk in my annual review. Mark said I needed to develop more of a leadership presence, but gave me 0 examples, completely ignoring the written praise I got from 3 other department heads. This wasn't just a burn book. I was looking for patterns. I was building a case not for HR, I knew that was a dead end, but for myself. The pattern was crystal clear. Mark was a terrible manager. He was great at charming his bosses, but he had no technical skills, couldn't communicate, and managed by making everyone afraid of him. He took all the credit and dodged all the blame. He wasn't a leader, he was a liability. The second part of the sponge phase was all about skills. I started studying Mark like he was my final exam. His biggest weakness? Data analytics and project management software. He loved to throw around buzzwords like data-driven decisions, but he couldn't build a pivot table if his life depended on it. He relied on me to make sense of the numbers, so he could spin a story for his bosses. So that's where I decided to attack. I would become an absolute master in the very areas he was a complete amateur. On my own dime, I took advanced courses in SQL, Tableau, and Agile project management. I spent my nights and weekends not just learning the stuff, but mastering it. I started building these incredible interactive dashboards for our team's performance that were so good, other departments started asking about them. I even got certified as a Scrum Master, learning a system for efficiency that Mark had written off as nerdy jargon. I never made a big announcement about my new skills. I just started using them. When a project was off the rails, I'd quietly build a dashboard that instantly showed where the problems were. When Mark asked for a general sense of something, I'd send him a link to a live report he could filter himself, knowing full well he wouldn't. My work got faster, cleaner, and more powerful. I was slowly making myself indispensable, but in a quiet way that wouldn't set off his alarms. I was basically volunteering for the work he hated, which made him see me as a helpful asset, not a threat. The last part of this phase was mapping out the office politics. Who really had power? Who did our VP, a woman named Eleanor, actually listen to? I noticed she valued data and hated corporate fluff, which was basically Mark's entire personality. That was a key piece of information. I made it my business to understand what the other departments we worked with needed. And I found out they were constantly frustrated with Mark's empty promises and missed deadlines. He created messes that I had to clean up. This went on for almost a year. On the outside, I was the same quiet, efficient Sarah. But on the inside, I was rearming. I wasn't just a doer anymore. I was becoming a weapon. After about a year of being a sponge, I moved on to phase 2, the ghost. The goal here was to build my reputation across the company, while becoming practically invisible to Mark as a threat. I had to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. A toxic boss wins by isolating you. So I had to do the opposite. I needed to build a network. I started by making myself useful to people outside my team. For instance, I saw the marketing team was struggling to show the ROI on their campaigns. I offered to help their lead analyst, Chloe, build a dashboard after hours. I didn't ask for anything. I just said, I love this stuff and I have a free evening. When Chloe showed that dashboard to her director, she became a hero. And she made sure her director knew that I was the one who helped her. Just like that, I wasn't Sarah from Mark's team anymore. I was Sarah, the data genius who helps people out. I did this over and over in small ways. I helped IT map out a workflow. I automated a weekly report for a junior sales guy. I never went through Mark. I was building this shadow network of goodwill. People saw me as competent, helpful, and not political. I wasn't trying to climb over anyone. I was helping everyone. The more people who knew my work, the less power Mark had to define me. At the same time, I managed Mark perfectly. I was always pleasant, always efficient, and completely non-threatening. I never challenged him in public. I fed his ego. If I had a new idea, I'd pitch it like it was his. Hey Mark, building on your idea from last week, what if we tried this? He ate it up. He was so arrogant, he couldn't imagine I was playing chess. He'd already decided I was just a worker bee, and his brain just refused to see anything else. My biggest move, though, was volunteering for a cross-functional task force. It was some boring-sounding digital transformation initiative that most senior people pawned off on their staff. Mark sneered at it, called it a do-nothing committee, and was thrilled that I was going to waste my time on it. What he didn't realize was that the committee was chaired by his boss, the VP, Eleanor. For the next 6 months, I was in a weekly meeting with Eleanor and a dozen other rising stars from across the company. This was my stage. In those meetings, I wasn't Mark's analyst. I was Sarah, the strategic thinker. I used my data skills to model cost savings. I used my project management training to redesign timelines and point out risks the outside consultants had missed. Eleanor started to notice. She started asking me questions directly. Sarah, what's your take on this? I was always ready, always direct, and always focused on solutions. I was showing the very leadership skills Mark said I'd never have. I was building my own reputation with senior leadership, completely separate from my boss. I basically became a ghost in my own department. To Mark, I was just his reliable workhorse. But across the rest of the company, I was becoming known as a star. He had no idea. He was so obsessed with titles and org charts that he couldn't see the real web of influence I was building in the spaces he chose to ignore. He thought power was a ladder. I was building it as a web. And I know what some of you might be thinking, so I have to ask. This was a long, slow game. I was building alliances and making myself visible to my boss's boss, all while managing him so he wouldn't get suspicious. Some people might call that manipulative. Others would call it a brilliant career strategy. What would you have done? Is building a network behind your bosses back a step too far? Or is it a necessary survival tool in a toxic workplace? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. If Phase 1 was learning and Phase 2 was networking, Phase 3 was all about setting traps. This was the most dangerous part of the plan. I called it the chess match. Now, my goal wasn't to sabotage Mark exactly. It was to create situations where his own incompetence and arrogance would do the job for me. The key was that every failure had to be 100% his. My fingerprints couldn't be anywhere near it. After 2 years of studying him, I knew his weaknesses. He was arrogant. He never read anything longer than a page. He made decisions based on gut feelings. And he was lazy. I used all of this against him. My first move was the Trojan Horse Report. Our department was trying to lead a massive internal project called the Odyssey Initiative. It was a huge deal, and Mark was desperate to get it for his own career. He put me in charge of the 50-page proposal. I worked for weeks and created a brilliant plan. The executive summary was full of the corporate buzzwords Mark loved. But buried on page 47, deep in an appendix, was a single paragraph. It detailed a critical risk. For the project to stay on schedule, The IT department needed to have a new server cluster running by Q3, and that required a 90-day lead time. The request had to be submitted by the end of Q1. I knew Mark would never read page 47. I sent him the full report. 5 minutes later, he replied, "Looks great, Sarah. Send it off." I saved that email. We won the project, and Mark took a victory lap, soaking up all the praise for his brilliant plan. Q1 came and went. He never submitted the server request. I didn't say a word. It's not my job to remind my director to do his job. My next move was the fork in the road. A few months into the project, a big problem came up with a vendor. We had two choices. Option A was a quick, dirty patch. It would look good for now, but I knew it would cause huge data problems later. Option B was the correct solution. It would take 2 weeks longer and mean admitting a small delay. I presented both options to Mark, but I framed them very strategically. I called option A the bold, executive decision that would show decisive leadership. I called option B the technically safe but overly cautious route. I knew which one his ego would pick. He couldn't resist looking like the bold, decisive leader. He chose option A and dismissed my warnings as getting stuck in the weeds. Again, I documented it. I sent a follow-up email. Per our conversation, the team will proceed with option A. Acknowledged risks of future data integrity issues are noted. He never replied. I saved that email too. For months, it was a game. I gave him all the information he needed to succeed, but I presented it in a way I knew he'd misuse. I gave him the rope, and he happily tied his own noose. Meanwhile, my work was perfect. My part of the project was all green. The problems were all sprouting from the decisions that he and he alone had made. The clock was ticking. The end didn't come with a shouting match. It came in the cold, quiet Q3 business review. We were in the main boardroom with Eleanor, our VP, and 2 other execs. The main topic? The Odyssey Initiative. The project was a complete disaster. It was millions over budget and months behind schedule. The data integrity issues I warned about had blown up, corrupting customer data. And the server cluster from my Trojan horse report was still just a piece of paper, holding up the entire next phase. Mark started the presentation, sweating. He blamed the vendors. He blamed IT. He blamed unforeseen market headwinds. He even tried to suggest my team had failed to execute. It was a masterclass in blame shifting. But Eleanor wasn't buying it. Her face was like a granite cliff. When Mark finished, she didn't even look at him. Her eyes scanned the room and locked on me. "Sarah," she said, her voice quiet but heavy, "you've been the operational lead on this from the start. What is your perspective?" This was it. 2 years of quiet work all came down to this one moment. I took a deep breath. I didn't have opinions. I had facts. "Eleanor," I started, my voice perfectly steady. "From a resource perspective, the server cluster specified in the original proposal wasn't procured in Q1, which created a 120-day delay." I glanced at my laptop like I needed to check a detail I knew by heart. "I have the proposal here, page 47, which outlines that dependency. The approval email from Mark is dated March 28th. I saw a flicker of panic in Mark's eyes. I kept going, my tone flat and professional. From a technical standpoint, we had a vendor issue in July. The decision was made to go with a short-term patch instead of the recommended solution. That led to the data issues we're now spending about 800 hours to fix. I paused. I have the email here summarizing the decision and the risks we noted, dated July 15th. I never looked at Mark. I just laid out the facts for Eleanor. The timeline, the decisions, the consequences, all backed up by the documentation I had been keeping for 2 years. I never said Mark failed. I just said a decision was made and provided the time-stamped proof of who made it. The silence in the room was deafening. I had taken apart his entire story in less than 3 minutes, using nothing but his own choices. He was completely exposed. He just sat there, his mouth opening and closing, but no words coming out. He had nothing. Eleanor looked at him, and for the first time, her corporate mask cracked. She looked at him with pure, ice-cold disappointment. "Mark," she said, her voice dangerously low. "Wait for me in my office." And that was it. An hour later, an HR rep walked him out of the building with his stuff in a cardboard box. He didn't even look in my direction. He couldn't. The next morning, Eleanor called me into her office, the same office where Mark had just been fired. My heart was pounding. She cut right to the chase. "Sarah, the board has lost confidence in Mark's leadership, but they have not lost confidence in this department. Your work on the task force and your clarity yesterday have been noted. I'm offering you the position of interim director of project strategy, effective immediately." I accepted. Walking into Mark's old office that afternoon was surreal. It was bigger, it had a window, but it didn't feel like a trophy. It felt like a responsibility. And the feeling wasn't glee. It wasn't this big, haha moment of revenge. It was just this quiet, heavy, sobering sense of victory. My very first act as director was to call a team meeting with the same people who had watched me get humiliated 2 years before. I didn't mention Mark. I didn't gloat. I just said that we'd been through a lot, and my job now was to give them the support and respect they deserved. I told them my door was always open, that credit would always go to the people who earned it, and that from now on, we would succeed or fail as a team. Over the next few months, we turned everything around. We righted the ship on the Odyssey initiative. We hit our new deadlines, and we became a department that people trusted again. Looking back, those 7 words, "You'll never be management material," ironically launched my management career. The humiliation I felt that day turned into a powerful, focused energy. It forced me to be smarter and more strategic than I ever thought I could be. But the best revenge wasn't just getting his job. The best revenge was becoming the kind of leader who would never, ever make someone feel the way he made me feel. So, I'll leave you with a question. Was this the ultimate professional revenge? Or was it a case of malicious compliance, a long, dangerous game? You be the judge. But either way, remember this. Never let anyone else define your ceiling. Sometimes the most powerful move is to just quietly build your own ladder.